Due to his father's sudden death, this man had to inherit the title and a vast rural estate with all its assets. However, not cash. To help his brother pay off a huge debt, he had to take over the cannabis empire left by his father. Unexpectedly, he fell into a criminal abyss. Things eventually got even more serious. This is the border between Turkey and Syria. Eddie and his teammates are routinely checking passing vehicles. At this moment, his father's lawyer, Ahmed, approached him. He was sure it wasn't good news. As expected, his father had a fall and his condition was very serious, so Ahmed wanted Eddie to be able to go home for a visit. He had obtained permission from Eddie's leader and could now take him to the airport. Very quickly, Eddie returned to the vast rural estate. His brother, Freddie, hugged him tightly and said that their father's illness had caused countless consequences. At first, Eddie's father could hardly recognize him. After waking up, he told him that the manor could not be divided. He also needed to take good care of his drug-addicted brother. Otherwise, he would go astray. Not long after, Eddie's father passed away in bed. At the funeral, he noticed a woman standing there from afar. At this time, his younger sister, Charlie, said the family's legacy had lasted for over 600 years. Surely, his drug-addicted brother, Freddie, would use up all the wealth to buy pleasure. Perhaps they should do something. However, Eddie said it didn't matter. After all, the manor would be passed down to the eldest son, Freddie. But Charlie suggested that they could work together to overthrow him. At this moment, Ahmed began to announce the contents of their father's will. First, to acknowledge Jeffrey's loyal service in overseeing the estate for many years, he had the right to use the gatekeeper's lodge for life, as well as an annual stipend for the matriarch Sabrina, as decided by the new duke. Even the Labrador dog was given to her. The endurance yacht would be for the daughter, Charlie, on the condition that within the next 6 months, she use it to travel around the world, along with a trust fund of £1,000 per week until she got married. As for the remaining inheritance, including the dukedom and all real estate, the large wine cellar, the art collection, the yogurt farm, the property located in the south of France, everything would be left to the second son, Eddie. At this moment, Freddie thought he had misheard and asked Ahmed to read it again carefully. He simply couldn't accept it. At the same time, Eddie still thought his father had made some kind of mistake, because Freddie was the eldest son, so traditionally that list of assets should be left to him. After some ridiculous complications, he angrily left the hall. Soon after, Eddie went to see his brother. While drunk, Freddie said he had a large debt out there. He had met Tommy at the drug rehab before. He had borrowed £4 million from him to invest in real estate owned by someone named Pete, but lost everything. And this money belonged to the entire Scouse drug trafficking family. Including high interest rates, the debt totaled £8 million. Currently, the interest rate was 25% per week until it was paid off. Also, if he didn't show up every weekend to pay back the money, they would turn him into a useless cripple. Eddie said that he didn't have that much money to give him. So Freddie scolded him for stealing his title and all his money, so Eddie had to help him pay off this debt. Freddie even boasted about how he had saved Eddie when he was 3 years old. Of course, he didn't forget this and promised to come up with a solution. After opening his father's safe and taking out all the money, there were only £2 million. Then, he asked Ahmed to raise another £6 million. But he said he had inherited a lot of assets, but not cash. So Eddie suggested selling a painting first. But if they wanted to sell it for a good price, it would take a few months. Coincidentally, there was someone currently trying to buy the estate and even wanted to pay more than the market price. Immediately, Eddie wanted him to find out what price they were offering. Just as Eddie was confused about what to do, the mysterious woman from the funeral appeared. She introduced herself as Susie, and her father had business dealings with Eddie's father throughout his life. But in Eddie's mind, his father was clearly not good at business. To prove her point, Susie took him to a farm. She said this farm had an annual turnover of £5 million. There was another bonus, a secret vault on the farm. The scene before his eyes surprised him because the things down there were all cannabis. Susie told Eddie that the overall market could generate over £6 billion a year, and they had captured most of this market. Eddie's father had provided them with a growing facility. To repay him, they were willing to donate money. On the way back to the manor, Eddie met the gatekeeper Jeffrey. He had worked at this estate for over 20 years, and he was very loyal to Eddie's father. At this time, Eddie hesitated to ask whether he should accept the donation or continue selling the property. Unexpectedly, what Jeffrey said next awakened him. He said his father's way of doing things was actually very practical. Moreover, Susie and the others had already taken root here. If Eddie had any trouble, they would definitely help. They seemed friendly, but don't be fooled by appearances. Afterwards, Eddie informed Ahmed that he would no longer sell the property. The next day, Charlie came to say goodbye and said her mother wanted her to continue studying for another year. so she had no choice but to give up traveling around the world. She also said that her mother was very worried about Freddie, but then Eddie affirmed that he would take care of him. Then, Eddie called Susie, asking her to raise $8 million as soon as possible. The reason was that Freddie owed money to the Scouse drug gang. When Susie found out the lender's name was Tommy, it turned out that her brother, Lucky, also knew this person. Eddie told her about the high interest rates that accounted for half of the $8 million, so Susie only asked him to prepare $4 million and she would take care of the rest. Soon after, a private assistant to a mysterious buyer named Stevens came to the manor. But at this time, Eddie informed Ahmed to stop selling the manor. So Stevens said his boss wanted to make a more attractive offer. Then he took out £250,000 as a greeting gift. On Susie's side, she went to the fish market to meet Tommy. As soon as she met him, she said she was Bobby Glass' daughter. Hearing this name, Tommy asked her to go upstairs. At this time, she went straight to the point about the $4 million principal that Freddie owed, and she would prepare it by the end of this week. After hesitating for a moment, Tommy reluctantly agreed. But Tommy wanted Freddie to come here in person to apologize to him. He wanted to record a video of Freddie showing how dirty he lived. At the same time, Eddie met the mysterious buyer named Stanley. Immediately, he stated the reason why he really wanted Eddie's land, because this building was an example of William Kent's architectural ideas. That's why he was willing to pay a high price to buy it. But Eddie said that made him even less willing to sell it. Then, Stanley offered Eddie a high price, but still couldn't convince him. Of course, Stanley still didn't give up and invited him to drink his rare wine. Immediately, Eddie smelled a very fragrant smell in this red wine. When he glanced at the bottle again, it was a Romani from 2002. But then he said he preferred Bordeaux red wine. Meanwhile, his father was a Burgundy fanatic. At the same time, Eddie also said that he had a collection of Romani from 1982. Stanley said there were only 6 barrels in the world. However, Eddie said there were 8 in total, and 2 belonged to the royal family, 1 to the Grand Duke of Moldova, and 2 to the Crown Estate, and the rest were all in his wine cellar along with 2 barrels from 1945. Because Stanley was a wine enthusiast, Eddie finally sold them to him for a high price. With the money from selling the wine and $2 million in the safe, he could almost pay off Freddie's debt. But when Eddie opened the safe, it was empty. It turned out that Freddie had taken all the money. At this time, he still stubbornly said he was going to take $2 million to bet on a boxing match through Pete. No matter how much Eddie advised, the guy refused to turn back. Afterwards, Eddie and Susie quickly went to find him. Under Lucky's arrangement, both of them successfully entered the venue. As soon as Eddie found Freddie and asked him to take back the money, Pete refused. On this side, Lucky told Susie that this boxing match was just a scam, and he found out that Freddie's money was not in the bet. Pete specializes in scamming money from the rich. In the end, under Susie's management, they successfully took back the $2 million. By the way, she also gave Pete a stern lesson. Seeing this scene, Eddie was very impressed with Susie in front of him. At this time, Freddie went to see Tommy and apologize, but he couldn't accept him recording a video to humiliate himself. Of course, Tommy couldn't agree. Soon after, he asked Freddie to turn into a real chicken. This humiliation made him unable to continue. Under Tommy's torture, the guy almost collapsed and went into the bathroom. After coming out of the bathroom, he took out a gun and shot. Witnessing what had happened before his eyes, Eddie knew that now everything was really out of control. At this time, Susie told Eddie that she could help clean up the body, and also the guy who was counting money for Tommy, Jethro. But Eddie didn't agree to kill him. At this time, the guy finished counting the money and took off his headphones. But when he saw the scene behind him, he signaled to shut his mouth. But only then did the guy run away, forcing Eddie to chase after him. Afterwards, the two chased into the forest. At this time, Jethro, who was hiding, quickly called someone, but there was no signal. While Eddie was searching around, Jeffrey and Freddie also came to find him. So, the three separated and continued to search. After a chase, Jethro finally ran out of ways to escape. Freddie said he would kill him, but Eddie snatched the gun away. But at this time, Jethro took the opportunity to send a message. However, Jeffrey quickly noticed, and Freddie threw the phone into the water. At this time, Errol received a message from Jethro, but the content was somewhat vague. This was at a church where Tommy's brother, John, was here. At this time, Errol said he couldn't contact Tommy after he went to get the money. But at this time, John thought his brother was just going somewhere to have fun. But the problem was that Errol had just received a strange message from Jethro. On the other hand, Susie said she would put Jethro in the trunk of her car, and also asked Eddie to let all the staff at the motel do it. At this time, Jethro was taken to the cannabis growing facility on the estate. Afterwards, he instructed Jimmy, who was in charge here, to watch him. Eddie asked Susie how she could solve the problem without killing anyone. Of course, She didn't want any more corpses because it would affect the business. She said that although Tommy was not a ruthless person, his brother, John, was the opposite. He was a devout Protestant and dangerous. Knowing some very powerful people, he had become one of the biggest drug dealers in the Northwest. At this time, Susie suggested leaving the matter to the experts. Afterwards, she contacted a body disposal expert named Felix. Through interrogation, Eddie learned that Jethro was in the choir of a church. He liked music and numbers, so they gave him the current job as the accountant of the Scouse crime family. But at first, he didn't know anything, until he witnessed them killing people like eating meals. At this time, he begged Eddie to let him go and wouldn't reveal any information. Soon, Felix's team arrived at the manor. They came up with a plan to chop the body into pieces and dig a hole, clean the blood stains on the walls, and throw away the gun. At this time, Eddie came up with an alternative plan to accuse Jethro of Tommy's murder. Say something was going on between Tommy and Jethro, and the two had an argument while counting money. They would reuse Tommy's phone, record a video of Freddie performing and put it in his pocket, then put the body in the trunk, making John think that Jethro had killed Tommy to take the money and run away. Eddie would give Jethro $2 million and put him on a container ship to Australia. After leaving, Eddie asked Felix to clean the room thoroughly, but the body would not be disposed of at the moment because he needed to talk to John first. At this time, Susie said she was just helping him solve the troubles. If he didn't need her help, she would tell Felix to pack up and leave. But Eddie quickly explained that he was just looking for a safer solution. So Susie told him 24 hours. Otherwise, she would have to clean up this mess. But when he got home, Freddie refused to dance and record a video, so he got slapped by Eddie. Next, he scolded him for the troubles he had caused. So now to clean everything up, he should listen to his arrangements. On Stanley's side, at this time, he was writing an invitation for Eddie to his party. Meanwhile, Eddie was recording Freddie's dance when his mother came in holding the invitation card. Soon after, John officially called Freddie. The guy didn't dare to answer and let Eddie do it. He said that Freddie was out to eat, so leave a message. It turned out that John wanted to ask about the whereabouts of his brother Tommy. So Eddie said he left at 11 a.m. But unexpectedly, John said he would come to the manor to visit him tomorrow at noon. The next day, they came with 2 cars. At this time, Freddie was so worried that he wanted to pee his pants. Anyway, Freddie had known the John brothers before. At this time, he said Tommy and Jethro disappeared after leaving the manor. But Errol immediately showed the two the message from Jethro with the content of dealing with Tommy. Afterwards, Eddie started making up stories, saying that Jethro had an argument with Tommy when they were counting money. Maybe Tommy was tired of counting money for too long. At this time, John suddenly said, "Is there anyone here who wants to repent?" As a result, all of his people immediately raised their hands. At this time, Freddie didn't sit still and raised his hand and said that he wanted to confess his sin of taking a life. And when John asked who he had killed, the atmosphere at the scene suddenly became tense. Because at this time, all eyes were on Freddie. Then he glanced at Eddie and said sorry for causing the death of Monty. It turned out that it was a cat of their family. That 25 years ago, Freddie wanted to teach Monty to swim and threw it into the lake. As a result, the cat sank further and further as it swam. Eddie immediately angrily said he had searched for it for 2 weeks, but couldn't find it. After listening to the conversation between the 2 brothers, John also lost patience. So he had to pull his people away. Suddenly, John stopped and said he felt that Tommy was dead. Even John asked the Eddie brothers to observe a minute of silence. After watching them leave, the 2 brothers could breathe a sigh of relief. Afterwards, Eddie met Jethro and asked for his home address to get his passport. Jethro also affirmed that he only lived alone. That night, Eddie used a key to open Jethro's door. But when he went into the room to find the passport, there was someone talking on the phone on the balcony. After searching for a while, Eddie still couldn't find Jethro's passport, and when he went to the room behind to search, he saw a fat guy sitting wearing headphones. Eddie then quietly entered the living room and saw Jethro's passport on the table. But when he was preparing to leave, he accidentally tripped over the headphone wire. Being discovered, Eddie immediately rushed over and wrestled with the guy. Clearly, this tall guy had a clear advantage over Eddie. Fortunately, Eddie grabbed a dart and stuck it into the other person's neck. With 2 gunshots afterwards, he died immediately. After calming down, he left with a gunshot wound. Returning, he wore a ballroom dress as if nothing had happened and went to Stanley's house. At this time, Susie was also present, asking if he had Jethro's passport. He nodded, but looked terrible. And the reason Susie was here was to find out the real reason Stanley wanted to buy Eddie's land. She guessed that the house was not a concern, and it was the cannabis growing facility on the estate. At the same time, she also discovered that Stanley was producing methamphetamine. If he participated, it would be a massacre. Afterwards, Eddie met Princess Roseanne, who was also Eddie's childhood friend. Stanley met Susie privately on the balcony and told her bluntly that she needed a partner if she wanted her business to remain the same. There seemed to be a threat in Stanley's words, but Susie only said she would think about it. Before leaving, she also saw Rosen bandaging Eddie's gunshot wound. At the same time, Felix was rebuilding the fake scene to blame Jethro for killing the fat guy. Before long, John came to the manor again, because he saw that Tommy and the fat guy were both killed by Jethro. But the gun at Tommy's body belonged to Eddie's family. So Eddie quickly explained that the gun was stolen not long ago, because the place where the gun was stored had no lock. So John suggested that he would keep the gun for a while until he found Jethro. The two brothers had no choice but to agree. After they left, the two of them felt that everything was finally resolved. Afterwards, Eddie took Freddie to the cannabis growing facility. This made an addict like Freddie extremely excited. A few days later, Eddie safely took Jethro away. Next, he discussed business with Susie's family. At this time, Eddie said he was going to meet her father. A few days later, Eddie brought his favorite steak to an open prison, and this person was Susie's father named Bobby. At this time, Eddie asked them to leave his land before the end of the year, but in return, it would help them make more money. After filling a truck with cannabis, Jimmy would deliver the goods to the distributor today. But halfway there, he felt hungry, so he stopped at a fast food restaurant. Suddenly, a girl sitting next to him gave him the sauce and took the initiative to talk to Jimmy. This made him a little proud because he was always single. A moment later, Gabrielle deliberately spilled the milkshake on him. Taking advantage of this opportunity, she stole the key to the truck. While buying Jimmy another milkshake, the key was given to another accomplice. Afterwards, Jimmy's truck was taken away without his knowledge. After breaking up with Gabrielle, the guy realized everything was too late. Susie, worried about the goods not being delivered in time, called Jimmy, but he didn't answer. Tony had been a regular customer of theirs for many years, and the money couldn't be returned. Because this was the rule, to compensate Tony, Susie agreed to help him steal a supercar. He also specified the color of the car and its current location. Agreeing to this was to prevent the company's reputation from being affected, because Susie's people were looking for Jimmy with a cannabis truck. So, the car theft could only be done by Eddie, and that was her father's request. But Eddie thought this seemed to violate the agreement and the nature of both sides. In return, he wanted to choose a specific date for them to move out of the estate at the end of the year. At this time, Lucky complained about what Bobby had seen in Eddie, but Susie said Eddie's psychological quality was very good. He was extremely calm after killing someone, and among the 24 dukes in this country, he was the only one who could control high society. At this time, Tony told them that time was very tight, because this sports car would only be in London for 2 days. The car was in the store of a woman named Moxie. She was very famous in the world of super luxury car modification. The car key was in Moxie's office drawer. After getting the key, they had to quickly copy it. Because Freddie wanted to go with him, Eddie asked Freddie to go with his wife, pretending to buy a car. At this time, Jeffrey discovered Jimmy naked in the forest in an unconscious state. On this side, 3 people Eddie went to Moxie's store. Immediately, Eddie aimed at the green sports car. However, Moxie didn't agree to sell it. So Eddie whispered to Freddie, let his wife Tess drive the McLaren next to it. She would be responsible for attracting Moxie's attention. Afterwards, Eddie went to the office to find the key Lamborghini. The drawer was full of keys, and he started trying them one by one. When he found it, he quickly went through the copying process. However, it would take 30 seconds to complete, but at this time Moxie found out that Eddie was not here. In the drawer, Eddie accidentally saw someone's finger, and at this time Moxie was rushing to the office. But when she opened the door, she only saw Eddie sitting there. He calmly said that he was just preparing a contract for her. At this time, Freddie's wife said that the car was pretty good. It's just that she didn't like the color of this one. Hearing this, Moxie asked them to go back and think about it first. Returning, Eddie told Susie about seeing a finger, but she didn't care and just suggested that he continue to steal the car. That night, Freddie drove a classic car carrying Eddie to Moxie's store. Arriving, Freddie was worried and wanted to wait for Eddie outside first. However, Eddie said he would be back soon. Afterwards, he hit the car outside to make the alarm sound. Very quickly, the security guard heard the alarm and ran over to check. Through this, Eddie took the opportunity to enter the store successfully. But when he was about to get on the Lumbo, he suddenly heard a scream. It turned out that it was the man who had his finger cut off. At this time, Freddie outside saw Moxie coming back. Therefore, he quickly called Eddie to stop the action. But as soon as he finished speaking, Eddie pressed the accelerator and drove the car out. But at this time, Freddie had a problem that the car couldn't start. Meanwhile, Eddie had arrived in the city center. The man that Eddie saved told him to return this car immediately. He would know what was going on when he opened the trunk of this car. When Eddie got home, he told Susie that there were 150 kilograms of drugs on the car, and the person who was rescued told him that it was all planned by Tony. First, he sent that man to do it, but failed and had a finger cut off. After the guy finished speaking, he prepared to run away, but unfortunately was hit by a car. At this time, Moxie called Eddie. To save Freddy, he had no choice but to return the car. At the same time, Susie also brought Tony to Moxie. Finally, in front of them, she killed Tony. At this time Jimmy received a call from the girl who tricked him, Gabrielle. She started using words of seduction again and wanted to meet him. Because Jimmy was a longtime FA, he couldn't escape the girl's seduction and agreed to meet. Soon after, Jimmy's truck full of cannabis was burned by Gabrielle. The next day, his mother told Eddie that he should get rid of these people instead of joining them. And he also said that he would drive them away as soon as possible. The Dorset Manor in front of us was built in 1802. The 4th Lord Bassington bought it for £3,000, and now the 8th Lord Bassington lives here. Because he couldn't stand the harassment of tourists coming to visit, he angrily fired a gun to drive them away and also died of a stroke soon after. At this time, Susie not only had no plans to move the cannabis facility out of the land, but to improve productivity. She was also preparing to expand the scale of operations at the manor. The new base is expected to be located below the stables. Of course, Eddie didn't agree with this at all. But Susie said as long as they agreed to move, he promised to help them make more money. So, before he came up with a new business plan, she just wanted to make more money. Eddie's mother also didn't agree with building this new base. However, Eddie didn't want his mother to get involved with these criminals, because Freddy was already an example. Next, the two mothers and sons will attend Lord Bassington's funeral. At this time, Eddie was very curious about the small window on his coffin. So his mother said according to his will, he wanted to be buried upright and have his face exposed. The purpose was that he could always see his manor. His son was Max, and also Freddy's co-star in the acting department at Durham University. Looking at the guy's beautiful hair, his mother said he had advertised for a shampoo brand. Max's father not only left assets but also more debt and financial burdens, and he would also become Eddie's successor target. At this time, Eddie saw Princess Roseanne was also here. He reminded her not to get too close to Stanley. At this time, Roseanne said that since her father passed away, Max was like a bird with broken wings. Hearing this, Eddie asked her to introduce himself to him. In the conversation, Max was worried about the inheritance tax. Then Eddie told him there were some business opportunities, maybe it could help him. After the brief introduction, Max was ready to agree. But before that, he had a livelihood problem that needed help to solve. Afterwards, he let Eddie hear the recording of the blackmail. The other party said they had in their hands the documents of illegal trading of antiques by Max's father. If he didn't want to be exposed, he needed to give them £500,000. At this time, Max said he would soon be appearing in a Hollywood blockbuster movie, so he didn't want his bright future to be ruined because of this. Max believed that Eddie's connections would be able to help him deal with this problem. To help Eddie find a location, his mother Sabrina wasn't idle either. So Jeffrey told her to try to find rocks on the neighboring farm, because his farm was about to go bankrupt. On this side, Jimmy had an appointment with Gabrielle. She immediately suggested that he let her see the garden he was taking care of. But Jimmy said that it was a restricted area. And there was something Jimmy couldn't understand. On the day he met Gabrielle, his truck was stolen again. At this time, Eddie and Susie quickly went to the place of the Max's blackmailer. He was named Frank and was packing his things to run away. It turned out that Frank was an old reporter specializing in collecting dirty information about powerful and wealthy people. At the same time, Sabrina and Jeffrey went to Rock's farm. Meanwhile, Jimmy was seduced by Gabrielle to the cannabis growing facility. He even told her that this was only one of 12 facilities. On Eddie's side, he took Frank to see Max with the file. As soon as he had it, Max threw it into the fire immediately. And when Frank received the money and left, he told Max that no matter who supported him, he couldn't change his nature. The things in the document bag, it would cause great damage to his career. At this time, Eddie said that whatever Max's father did when he was alive was now over. But Frank said that the person he blackmailed was not Max's father but him. Immediately, Susie asked Max to clarify this matter. With no choice, Max took everyone to a secret room. It turned out that he was a Hitler fanatic. Not only did he collect Hitler's paintings, but he also collected some of the models from his body. At this time, Frank took out his phone and secretly recorded a video and was discovered by the housekeeper. When Max pulled out his gun, Susie also took out her gun to warn him. Afterwards, when they were outside, Frank was stabbed in the chest with a knife, and at this time Susie called Felix's team to deal with the corpse. It turned out that the housekeeper had attacked Frank just now. Eddie quickly knocked Max down and ran away from the housekeeper's bullets. Afterwards, he threw a grenade to resolve the situation. When he got home, His mother told Eddie that she had found a new place for the cannabis facility, which was Rock's 8,000 square meter farm. At this time, Eddie admired his mother very much, because in the past 48 hours, he had struggled and got nothing. Today, Susie went to the prison to visit her father. The warden enthusiastically told Susie that her father was playing with pigeons. This was an open house for drug lords at Hill in England, so Bobby had certain privileges here, such as a Nordic sauna, a swimming pool, and a golf course. In addition, Bobby also had a top chef of his own. Although life in prison was extremely comfortable, at this time, he told Susie that she should raise a glass to congratulate Eddie for giving them 2 new cannabis farms. However, she said his help was only to get them to move faster. But Bobby said he didn't want to leave this place at all. So, he wanted Susie to be responsible for keeping him in hand. While playing golf, Susie asked Eddie if he was willing to take on a more formal position in the organization. But Eddie indirectly refused and changed the subject immediately. Currently, there is a problem with Susie's cannabis exports through the port of Zeebrugge. They have been shipping 80 million pounds of cannabis every year, but recently the export process has encountered some obstacles. In Belgium, the federal police have seized several of their shipments. So now Susie can only temporarily suspend exports, so there is a lot of money that she has not received. A man named Groot is in charge there. Soon after, Susie arranged for her subordinates to bring him to the farm. At this time, Groot said their country has established more laws and regulations. The European Union has had to hire more staff to enforce them. It also means having to bribe more people. So, if you want the goods to continue to be shipped to the European continents, Susie has to spend more money, and the price that Groot gave now was 1.5 million pounds. At this time, Eddie told Susie that this guy was deliberately leaking information to the border guards to raise the price. But Susie thought that if it only increased by 10%, it was not surprising. But now Groot has doubled it, so it seems that he is in the active position. But if we meet his conditions now, it may continue to increase in the future. Afterwards, Susie said she would pay 1.2 million, but Groot said she had to pay the current amount, and 1.5 million was the additional amount. At this time, the cannabis base suddenly lost power. It turned out that the generator on the farm had been stolen. So Eddie quickly chased after them, and Jeffrey caught up with the car. It turned out that they were a group of nomads. The girl also threatened that if they dared to kill them, their family would definitely find a way to take revenge. At this time, she told Eddie that the government had taken away all their engines, and now there was no heating, so the children could only sleep on cold beds. So Eddie gave them a generator and kept one for the base. At this time, Eddie was still worried about whether there would be any trouble in the future. So Jeffrey told him that the Ward family was famous in this area for hundreds of generations and always grumpy people, so they need to be careful of these people. The next day, Eddie and Susie visited the Ward family. He wanted them to stay away from his manor in the future. Unexpectedly, the head, JP, wanted to participate in their business because he already knew about Eddie's cannabis farm. After discussing with Susie, Eddie said whether they could smuggle goods across the border. If useful, they brought the product to Europe. In the end, the two sides reached an agreement. Soon after, they all came to the manor as guests. Kellyanne loved Charlie's horse very much, so Jeffrey allowed her to ride the horse around. At this time, Sabrina felt that Kellyanne looked a lot like her daughter when riding a horse, and a shocking secret was revealed that Charlie was Sabrina and Jeffrey's illegitimate daughter. On this side, JP said they often traveled to and from Europe, and this time his family would go through Germany, so they stuffed cannabis into the statue of the Virgin Mary. In this way, they successfully transported cannabis throughout Europe, and it also brought them a stable source of income. It didn't take long for the cooperation between the two sides to go smoothly. But at this time, Groot gave the information provided by the person in the cannabis farm to a mysterious person, and on that night, £4 million from the cannabis farm went missing. At this time, Keith talked about seeing JP hanging around before. Immediately, Eddie ran to JP's house and asked him. Of course, he said he didn't do it, it was Eddie's side. In the end, the two broke up unhappily. According to Eddie's analysis, if the nomads are blamed for disrupting the European transportation route, the only beneficiary is Groot. If the Ward family really stole the money, they would have run away. So, Groot must have planned this, because only he has internal information about the cannabis farm. Afterwards, the two went to the port of Zeebrugge and drugged Groot with food. To get the antidote, he had to write down the name of the inside man in the cannabis farm. Unexpectedly, the person Susie always trusted, Keith, did this. Afterwards, Eddie took Keith into the forest and handed him over to the Ward family. But when he arrived at the prison, Susie's father didn't think it was Keith's idea. Susie said that first a truckload of cannabis was stolen. Then there were obstacles on the European transportation route, and then another trader appeared in the house. There must be a big problem behind this. But Bobby asked her to wait and see what would happen next. On the side of the forest, at this time Keith told Eddie that Jethro had been killed and his body was at the bottom of the Thames River. As soon as these words came out, Eddie was immediately worried. But then, a gunshot rang out and Keith officially fell. At this time, Susie called Eddie to confirm that Keith had been dealt with. However, Eddie began to lose trust in Susie. That night, Eddie went to the manor and wanted to talk to Jeffrey about his worries. And now he realized that Susie's family was not as simple as he had said before. If he wanted to try to get away from them, he might lose his life. He advised him to continue doing his part and see how they reacted, especially not to let them see through his thoughts, and at the same time prepare for all situations. The next day, Eddie invited Susie to the manor for coffee. Eddie said that business profits are currently increasing, indicating that the distribution work is going well. The production volume has also increased significantly. This means that it has reached the threshold where Eddie can withdraw from the organization. But Susie talked about the previous renewal issue. Anyway, the amount he received would also increase accordingly. But Eddie insisted on giving up. Then Susie talked about money isn't profit until it's laundered. She needs another 15 million pounds, and it may take about 3 months. Afterwards, Susie took Eddie to meet a money launderer named Chucky. He said that if you want to launder 15 million pounds, it will take at least 4 months. As a result, Lucky took advantage of Chucky's girlfriend and was caught red-handed. The two sides immediately had a conflict and Chucky was knocked down. So, the money laundering didn't go anywhere. At this time, Lucky's agent Collins took the initiative to go and find Eddie. He said that he could launder money for him. Afterwards, Eddie met Roseanne to ask her to help arrange an appointment with Stanley. Soon after, Collins introduced Rick to Eddie. He was originally an accountant but had a gambling addiction. He has carried out many money laundering cases in gambling games, and the commission for carrying out the mission is 5%. Afterwards, Eddie brought 15 million pounds to Rick. However, Susie blamed him for not following her instructions. Then Eddie bluntly said he knew that Susie's father didn't want to let him go. Hearing this, Susie still stubbornly denied it. At this time, Eddie talked about Jethro's death again. So, Susie said that Jethro had to die to protect him and Freddie, because one day Jethro would become a problem. And Susie said that she would never let him go. Eddie also replied that he would do whatever was necessary to protect his family. At this time, Eddie and Stanley met. He was also very willing to help Eddie deal with Susie's family, but of course there were conditions. And Eddie said he was willing to do whatever it took. At the same time, Lucky's match was about to begin. At this time, Collins called Stanley. As long as he gave the order, Collins would knock down the first domino immediately. At this time, Lucky's opponent appeared. The guy said that he had watched the opponent's matches before, and today he was very confident to defeat his opponent. A moment later, Susie was called to Collins' office. He told Susie that Lucky was going to be miserable. At this time, he mentioned the 15 million pounds and the monthly income of the cannabis farm, and Collins said he would take over the cannabis farm. But Susie said he should be content with his boxing organization and money laundering work. But Collins continued his threats. Susie now has 2 paths. One is to hand over all of her business to him, or it will be a war and it will start with taking Lucky's life. Because the boxer in front of you only pretended to lose in previous matches. In his 30 matches, he won 3 matches, and the 27 matches he lost were intentional. At this time, Lucky was beaten to the point of collapsing on the floor. Collins continued to say that Lucky might never be able to stand up again. Not long after, the guy was beaten unconscious. At that time, Susie realized the seriousness of the problem. At this time, Eddie called Susie, but the call was forwarded to voicemail. Lucky was still in a coma in the hospital. His previous glory has become a thing of the past. From Jimmy, Eddie got Susie's address and went to her house. Arriving, she was very vigilant and asked Eddie how he knew her address. Eddie said he had nothing to do with this. He wouldn't go to Collins to launder money either. When Eddie said he could help Susie, she said she didn't need his help. Next, Susie began to prepare a counterattack. When she went to the prison to meet her father, she was scolded by him for going around killing people. Before, Susie had people kill the boxing referee in broad daylight. Then he shot the boxer who injured Lucky. Not finding Collins, she also injured the money launderer Rick. This made Collins more vigilant. So, Bobby said he would let his people resolve the situation. At this time, Eddie met Stanley's private assistant Stephen. He said that as long as Eddie provided an address of Susie's remaining 13 cannabis farms, they would help him and his family escape these troubles. At this time, Charlie returned home. It turned out that she was pregnant while she was studying, so she asked to go home to take care of herself. Fortunately, the family didn't blame her for this big belly. At the reminder of her mother, Eddie and Freddie went to Tibbsy Manor. The purpose was to find the addresses of other cannabis farms. Fortunately, Tibbs's diary and the addresses of 11 manors were recorded in this book. At this time Collins was under Susie's house. He gave her a hamburger as a threat. Afterwards, he warned Susie that if she dared to touch his people again, she would also lose her life. Afterwards, Susie met Eddie and blamed him after he knew her address. Collins also knew that. Now, she can't go back to her old apartment anymore. At this time, Jimmy confessed that Susie had brought her shoebox here. So, according to the shipping label, he knew Susie's address. He also gave the address to the girl who stole the truck, Gabrielle. So the next day, Jimmy made an appointment with her. Soon after, Susie appeared and pointed a gun at her head. It turned out that she was hired by Stanley with 20,000 pounds to steal the cannabis truck. Afterwards, Stephen burned all the cannabis. It was also Stanley who blocked the transportation route in Europe. Keith was also his inside man in the cannabis farm, and now Collins is also helping Stanley. At this time, Susie wanted to deal with Collins before he killed her, and also asked Gabrielle to work for her. Afterwards, Stephen received false information from Gabrielle. Eddie also wrote a fake list of cannabis farms for him. Before giving it to Stephen, he also asked Stanley to ensure the safety of his family. On the other hand, Collins is now ready to kill Lucky. At the same time, Eddie went to the prison to visit Susie's father and told him everything about the current relationship between Collins and Stanley. On this side, Collins entered the hospital preparing to kill Lucky. Unexpectedly, Susie had arranged it and was waiting for him here before. Her people appeared and attacked Collins unexpectedly. Finally, he was injured. At this time, he told Susie that Eddie had tricked her. To avenge Eddie, she called John and said that it was Freddie who took his brother Tommy's life. It seems that the Eddie brothers are about to be in big trouble again. The next day, Jeffrey saw 5 unidentified cars parked near the manor. So he quickly called Eddie. After Eddie arrived, he realized that it was John and his henchmen. This also means that his family is about to face disaster. Eddie quickly called Freddie to ask about the situation, but he said how dare he have anything to do with John anymore. Feeling that something was wrong, Eddie asked his family not to go out during this time. Afterwards, Eddie went to the manor and found some weapons. At the same time, John also began to embark on his hunt. They quickly approached the manor. Soon after, Freddie saw their figures. Afterwards, John calmly called him. His purpose was clearly to say that he was here to collect debts. There were 2 ways to solve it. Either Freddie came out, or he would break in. At the hospital, at this time Susie also received a call from her father. He said that he needed to talk to Eddie, so Susie had to find him here immediately. But Susie said that maybe Eddie would not be able to come because he had betrayed them. But Bobby said Susie should check the latest news. No matter what she does, she needs to fix it now, because now he needs Eddie and must ensure his safety. Afterwards, Eddie called Susie and told her that John had gone to the manor. Susie also confessed that it was her fault and was on her way to help him. At this time, Eddie asked his mother to close all the doors and windows quickly. And when Freddie wanted to go out and take responsibility for his actions, he was stopped by Eddie. At the same time, Jeffrey was bringing 5 shotguns and a rifle preparing for the battle. Soon after, Jimmy also sent military weapons. Afterwards, Eddie arranged for his family and staff to hide in the shelter. Just when everyone was ready, John suddenly received a call. Because when everyone took out their guns, John and his people disappeared. It turned out that it was Bobby who called him, saying that he would compensate him to let go of what happened just now. At this time, Bobby asked Susie and Eddie to make peace first, because now Bobby felt that he was getting old and wanted to retire and prepare to sell his business, thereby carrying out the removal of the cannabis farm from Eddie's manor. But Bobby wanted to sell the business to the highest bidder, as an auction with a starting price of $50 million. All bids must be placed by the end of this week. Finally, he wanted Eddie to work with Susie to make sure that he got the best deal. When they left, they took away a few carrier pigeons. At this time, Stanley went to meet Susie and said his intention to take over her father's business. The story of Bobby wanting to sell the business is no longer a secret. Stanley was also confident that he now had the addresses of the remaining 12 farms. But at this time, Eddie told him that the list he gave to Stephen was fake. Afterwards, Eddie and Susie went to the luxury car seller Moxie, with an invitation to cooperate and control 50% of the cannabis trading market in the UK, because the two knew that Moxie now had a large line in South America. Eddie also gave her a carrier pigeon. Afterwards, he went to see the guy Pete. The goal was to get the Russian boss behind him to participate in this auction. Returning to Stanley, Susie said that if he bid higher than others, her father would be willing to transfer the business to him, and also left a carrier pigeon for the final auction this weekend. At this time, Eddie was preparing for a big game. He told his lawyer Ahmed to start by drafting some terms of the association and prepare to raise £200 million. Then, he would have the opportunity to buy back Bobby's entire business. Most of the funding would come from the remaining 12 lords. If he could convince them to each put out 10%, it would be smooth. Next, Eddie went to his nomad family friend JP, because since they participated in the shipping industry, they had a lot of reserves in hand. At this time, Ahmed told Eddie that if everything went smoothly, there would be only 25 million at best, plus 10 million from his mother who sold all the shares. Calculated in this way, there is still a shortage of 15 million. At this time, Eddie's mother suggested that he should cooperate with Susie. It would be easier to manage the business. Afterwards, Eddie went to see Collins. At this time, he said he had returned 15 million to Susie and compensated Lucky 15 million. But Eddie didn't care. He just wanted to invite him to participate in the new mission. Eddie hoped Collins would invest 15 million in stocks so that he could get Bobby's business. Afterwards, Eddie told Susie that his family had lived in this manner for many generations, and now he had donated a lot of money. If Susie was interested, she could also participate in the investment with 35 million, so that she would become an equal partner. Because now he doesn't want to get out of this business, he will directly engage in it. The weekend has also arrived. Stanley, Pete, and Moxie are all ready to release pigeons. On this side, Eddie asked Jeffrey to do it. Soon after, Bobby excitedly read the letters on these pigeons. He told Eddie and Susie that all 4 people bid extremely high, but a letter had both Eddie and Susie's names written on it. This made Bobby unexpected because the two had really cooperated with each other. But according to the results of the auction, Stanley was the highest bidder. And when Stephen went to the bank to transfer the money, unexpectedly, Eddie asked Collins' people to play Stanley. That was to have Rick send his tax records to the Director General of the General Administration of Customs. As a result, Stanley was arrested for many counts of tax evasion, and the assets were also frozen immediately. Afterwards, Eddie lied to Moxie that Pete had won the auction. As a result, she went hunting for Pete and took his life. But soon after, Collins appeared and gave Moxie a shotgun blast. When he returned, he sent 15 million to Eddie to settle the share. But unexpectedly, at this time Jeffrey pointed a gun at his head. The cannabis empire was finally sold for 235 million pounds to Eddie and Susie. In the forest, Eddie personally took Collins' life in front of Susie. A signal of a new tycoon has been formed. 3 months later, Stanley also came to the prison with Bobby. He reassured Stanley that there was nothing to worry about. As long as you get used to it, going to prison is not a bad thing. Bobby also told Stanley that the chef had no chance of being pardoned. So, the two can enjoy high-quality cuisine every day here. So the movie ends here. Please leave a comment below how you feel. See you in the latest videos.